In this video article, we're going to look at what bass players should practice instead of scales. Now, if you don't know who I am Paul Wolf from howtoplaybassdotcom. This is a screen capture video of my Amazon author page. You can see some of my currently 27 books. It's August 26th, 2025. I've got 2 books about 60-70% done, another one about 10%, so depending on when you watch this there may be more books there. 2 books that are probably most relevant to this video are going to be How to Play Bass Guitar in 50 Songs Module 1, which is the one with the green guitar spine you can see kind of on the left, and then the one more towards the middle with a reddy orangey kind of guitar spine, Learning from James Jamerson Volume 1. That'd be more relevant to you if you can play a bit and are not a beginner but want to learn some of the things we're going to talk about. So, in the previous video, I laid out numerous reasons why you shouldn't practice scales. That video was called something like Why Bass Players, Especially Beginners, Shouldn't Practice Scales. If you haven't seen the video yet, go and check that out. I'll link it in the description below. But do watch that before you watch this video. So, if you shouldn't practice scales, what should you practice? I think the thing that you should be practicing is a thing or a musical segment that I call devices. And devices are the building blocks of bass lines used in rock and pop. And that covers country, blues, funk, soul, reggae, etc. All of those kind of genres. The only genre it doesn't really cover is walking bass, although there is crossover, and slap bass and tap bass and all that kind of like Victor Wooten stuff, where you're getting a bit more extreme. That has different vocabulary and doesn't use the building blocks that 99.9% of us use to create bass lines to rock and blues and all those other genres. And all the players that we admire, Jamerson, McCartney, Geddy Lee, Flea, Duck Dunn, Tommy Shannon, Rocco Prestia, the list goes on, Bruce Thomas, the list goes on and on. They all use these devices in their lines. Whether they know what they're using, I think that a lot of the especially the earlier guys, when there was literally no literature available for the bass guitar, they played what they heard in other people's playing, which was how the vocabulary was transmitted from one player to another. And Jamerson and McCartney, I have a phrase that I use where I say all things on the bass, or all roads on the bass, lead back to Jamerson and McCartney. Jamerson brought his jazz influences into his bass playing. McCartney brought his influences from playing covers, where he was playing everything from country to rock and roll to some blues, into his bass playing, and those two then influenced the next generation of bass players, and their vocabulary, or the vocabulary that they used, was passed down and adapted and modified and built upon by the bass players who came after them. So you'll find this material that we're going to talk about in songs going back to the early 60s right through to contemporary songs right now. And if there's a bass player you admire, the chances and probabilities are very high that they use devices, even if they don't know they're using them as such. They're just going, all right, I want to play, I want to use a line that gets me from the root note of a C7 chord to a G7 chord. What device are we going to use? We'll see a device that fits that bill in this lesson. So what is a device exactly? Now, devices are most commonly 4-note ideas, but they can be 2-note or 3-note ideas as well. It depends on the rhythmic complexity of the bass lines and the style of song that you're playing under. Here's the really important point about devices. Specific devices work with specific 2-chord movements. So let me just quickly define what a 2-chord movement is. Within chord progressions in songs, if you think of the blues, and let's say we're playing the blues in C7, you've got C7 to F7. That's a specific 2-chord movement. You have F7 back to C7. That's a different 2-chord movement. You'll have C7 to G7. That's actually the same movement as F7 to C7 in terms of the intervals between the root notes. You'll also have G7 to F7. That's another 2-chord movement. And the other one that you'll find in most 12-bar blues which you might not think is a 2-chord movement, is when one chord stays on the same chord for more than one bar. So C7 to C7 or F7 to F7. To make good bass lines, you have to treat that as a chord movement where you target the same root note or the root note an octave different, an octave higher or an octave lower on the next bar. You have to treat it as a chord change. So those are 2-chord movements, and sometimes devices will work for multiple 2-chord movements, sometimes they only work for one. But as you build up a vocabulary of these, as well as learning the devices, you need to learn what 2-chord movements it works with. And we'll talk more about this in the next video, which is the 3 things every good bass line has to do. Now, let me demonstrate. Here's a simple bass line. This was taken from song 28, which is in, I think is in module 2, or might be at the start of module 3 of the How to Play Bass in 50 Songs series. The notes of the bass line are annotated out. You can see how they function in relation to the chord that they're playing. So if we look at bar 3, the notes rather are F down to D, down to C, down to A. And those are the 8, which is the octave, the 6, the 5, and the 3. Now, the bars that I want to look at are bar 4 and bar 8. And what we've got here is a device where it goes from the octave of the chord. So in bar 4, it's an F. It goes down to the 3. It goes to the 4. And then the next annotation is CH. That stands for chromatic, and it means the note is the chromatic note between the 4 to the left and between the root note to the right on the downbeat of bar 5. And in bar 8, what you're not seeing is the chord that this section of the song moves to. The next chord is a G chord. So in bar 8, we've got 8, 3, 4, chromatic. And the chromatic note is between the 4, which is F, and the G, which is the root note of the next chord. I've got a video example of this. Click in the middle, it should play. Here we go. So, nice simple bass line. When we do the 3 things that every good bass line should do, I'll come back to this bass line and I'll analyze it and show you exactly why it works, how all the parts work to do the 3 tasks that we need to do. Let's move on. If we just revisit the verse again, just so I can point out this is just using simple devices. In bars 1 and 2, we've just got major triads, root 3, 5, 3. We've talked about bars 3 and 4. In bar 5, we've got a root 3, 5, 3 again. In bar 6, the chord that the bass line has to move to in bar 7 is a B flat. So we've got a major triad, but we've got a variation, and it's root 3, 5 back to the root. And that root note is only a tone higher than the root note of B flat, and we've used that device again in bar 7, root 3 5 root. McCartney used root 3 5 root a lot in his early bass lines. So again, all roads on the bass lead to McCartney and Jameson. And then in bar 8, we've got this 8 3 4 chromatic device. Now I want to look at this device in a bit more detail. So here is a graphic showing this device used to get from C to G7, and you'll notice there are 2 ways you can do it. You can go up from the root, so you can play root 3 4 chromatic and then up to octave G, although it's annotated as a root note, and then in bars 3 and 4 you could go from the root note, and now it's annotated as an 8 because all the notes after it are below the root note in pitch, and it goes down to the 3 and then the 4 and then the chromatic, and then it comes to the root note of G7. Now, why these things are important to know and practice is because if you just practice scales, you'd never find that chromatic note between the 4 and the root of the next chord, because scales don't target practicing in 2-chord movements. So I've recorded that example. This has come from a previous course. Just have a quick listen to that. And I'm going to play that again. The reason being, I want you to hear, even though we're playing 2 notes that normally we'd think about avoiding in bass lines on a major chord, which are the 4 and the chromatic note. So that would be in C, that would be the F and the F sharp. They don't sound out of place because the chord's outlined by playing from the root to the 3rd, which is C and E, and then E, F, F sharp, G makes a linear chromatic run that when you get to the G, any tension that's created by using the F and the F sharp just resolves. So let's see if I can yeah, we go. So just listen to that again and hear the 4 notes and hear how when you get to the G, there's a sense of resolution. There we go. Let's start that playing. And another thing that you may have noticed there, when I played down from the C to the open E string, I then fretted the F with the first finger, fretted the F sharp with the first finger, and then fretted the G with the second finger to use the notes of the device as a way to transition around the neck to get fretboard fluency. Again, if you practice scales, you don't build up that kind of fretboard fluency from that. So in all my courses, examples look like this. There's a performance tempo version and a slow tempo version. We don't need to see the slow tempo version. So let's move on and look how you would use the root 3/4 chromatic or the 8/3/4 chromatic in an exercise where you can practice it all over the neck. So I call those exercises origin exercises. I've got a video coming up probably next week where I'm going to look at Jameson's infamous chromatic exercise, and I've got my own unique take on that. So if you're interested in Jameson and interested in that exercise, my take I think will be eye-opening for you. But this exercise uses the cycle of fifths. We're going around from C7 to G7 to D7 to A7 and so on, and we're going to cover all 12 keys. And if you look at the tab, you'll see that this covers a decent amount of the neck. We get up to, in bar 12, we get up to fret 8 of the A string, but then notice that we're going from the root note played at the octave level, hence it's an 8, and then we're going down and we're playing the open A string, which is the 3rd, so we're using the open string to transition, which again is another way to transition around the neck that you'll never learn if you practice scales. So on the next slide, I've got a video of this. So let's have a listen to this exercise. So the other thing to note from these exercises is I'm playing them with practice tracks where you've got real world rhythm and real world harmony on. So you're getting subliminal ear training from listening to the chords. You could also practice this. The chords here, the chord qualities are dominant 7, but this would work for a major 7 chord as well, or any kind of major chord. So you could change the chord qualities. So you get some subliminal ear training. But the thing about devices that's really cool, so that exercise was a quarter note. We can play an identical exercise but replace every quarter note with 2/8 notes of the same pitch. And if we do that, this is what the exercise would look like. We'd get this. It's absolutely identical, but now you're playing a much more involved rhythm with the plucking hand, but you're still playing the same devices. And again, future video, I'll talk about how devices are fractal. We don't have room to cover that properly here. I've got this on a video. Let's go listen to that. Now, there are multiple ways that you can vary that up. Let me just go back because I don't want you to see that yet. One way would be you can change all the rhythms that you've got. So instead of playing eighth notes, you could vary that up and have a dotted quarter note on the downbeat, then an eighth, and then 5/8 notes. You could play it with quarter note, 2/8 notes, quarter note, 2/8 notes, or you could switch that. You could have 2/8 notes, quarter note, 2/8 notes, quarter note. So there's multiple ways you could do the same exercise with different rhythms. On the next slide, which I inadvertently clicked over to, I don't want that. Here we go. What I've done on this exercise, you see it's slightly different, and this touches on the fractal nature of devices. Now what we've got is the device is played at an eighth note level. So the different device notes sound, they only last for an eighth note. So it's the same exercise, but we've got a root note played on the downbeat, then a beat of pause, and then the device is played over 4/8 notes instead of in the previous example. Let's see if I can go back and scroll. So in the previous example, in fact, let's go back there. So here in this example, the device notes are played over the entire bar, and each device note lasts for a quarter note, and that's still the same here, even though we're executing it in eighth notes. So let's go forward. Here we go. So this exercise, the device notes are an eighth note in length, and that's the rhythm we're playing. So let's listen to the video. I've got to click somewhere. Here we go. Okay, so that should give you an overview of how devices work. As I said, there are a bunch of device families, and what's interesting is someone like Duck Dunn or Tommy Shannon, both highly revered bass players, have a vocabulary of only about 20 device families, but how they get their unique sound is they use their own blend of modifying devices, which I'll talk about in a future video, and their own blend of rhythms to make their execution unique to their personality, and which is something you can do. You can consciously sculpt your own bass playing sound by judiciously picking devices that you like the sound of, that are interesting, that are cool, and the rhythmic execution of them. But there's a million things you can do with devices in terms of exercises and practicing them, and we've only touched on origin exercises, which cover all 12 keys, but you can take common chord progressions and practice one or two devices with common chord progression. And a common chord progression would be something like C to F to C to G7, really familiar chord progression. If I played that for you, you go, yeah, I know that because it's been used in a gazillion songs. And that, again, there are a bunch of common chord progressions that if you learn, you can incorporate into your practice. And then if you use real-world rhythms, what you've got is the trifecta of real-world devices, real-world chord progressions, real-world rhythms. So remember, in the previous video, I said the maxim, practice how you're going to play. That's exactly how you get practice exercises that will sound like mini versions of bass lines. Simplistic bass lines, because they might only use one or two devices, but they'll sound like bass lines because they use bassline fundamentals. Again, if you try practicing scales with common chord progressions, it will sound utterly shit. And in fact, when I get onto that, I'll do a common chord progression video, and I'll show you what it sounds like trying to fit scales into a common chord progression, and it sounds dreadful and nothing like a bass line. So, summing up what we've learned, we've only scratched the surface of what you can actually do with devices. As I say, it's an overview. I've only shown one, and there have been no variations of that. And that's one device out of a library of 50 so device families. And again, I've shown you no variations. With the device we've just looked at, there is at least 2 or 3 variations that you can use to vary the sound up. Plus you can combine it with some modifying devices, again varies the sound up. So there are learning these things, if you think, wow, learning the devices, if you think that might constrain you, the actual truth is the opposite, because once you've got a device library of devices that you like the sound of, and you know some modifying devices, the possible permutations are almost an infinite number. So they don't constrain you, and what they do is they guide you as to play in an authentic manner using vocabulary that all your bass playing peers have used. And as we'll see in the 3 things every good bassline video should do, they guide you to play in accordance with the principles of creating good bass lines. So that's what we'll talk about in the next video, how you create bassline with the devices and how they perform the three functions that bass lines do. Now, if you're interested in following up on this further, the 2 books to check out if you're a beginner is the How to Play Bass Guitar in 50 Songs series, starting with Module 1. If you can play a bit but you want to learn more about devices, then probably How to Play Bass, learning from James Jameson Volume 1, maybe learning from McCartney Volume 1, depending on what your preferences are. Both of those books cover similar thematic detail, but obviously Jameson comes from a more, the Jameson book comes from a more R&B soul orientated view, and the McCartney book comes from a more 60s rock and pop kind of viewpoint. Although I must make the point, neither of the Jameson or McCartney books are intended for you to duplicate what those guys did. What they are intended to do is teach you some of the foundational things those guys did so that you can incorporate those in your bass lines. One final note before we close out. If you buy the book new on Amazon, if you go to your local Amazon, search Paul Wolf Bass Books, you'll find all my bass books, and there's a link to my author page on Amazon.com in the description below. And if you're saying California, in Canada, you can just take .com and change it into .ca, or if in the UK, change it to .co.uk, that kind of thing. But if you buy the book new, send me a copy of your invoice. I'll add you to the online version. The online version has all the examples played, kind of in the style where I didn't, kind of in the style you've seen, but you get picture in picture, you get a performance tempo version played with some kind of backing track generated in Band in a Box, and you also get a slowed down version played with a chordal metronome, which is just some basic rhythmic information and a block chord at every bar. And there are also bonus lessons, and you get MP3 tracks to download as well. So it becomes a really comprehensive resource if you do that. So those are the 2 books to look at if you're interested in taking it further. Thank you for your time watching this video today. If you've got any questions, just drop me an email. You can see the website address below there. Just swap out www full stop and put Paul at, and that will get your email to me. Thank you again for your time. I'll catch you in the next video where we're going to look at the 3 things that bass lines, that every good bass line should do. And I think that will be an interesting video for you as well.